Hi guys, Happy New Year. So finally I feel well enough to hop on and film a new video because the last two videos that I posted were all pre-recorded from sort of early December, and I think for most of you who follow me on Instagram will know that I was very ill from sort of second week of December right the way through, and even to now I'm still in the process of recuperating. I was actually hospitalized with COVID, and it was a really horrific ordeal. And what I really wanted to do today was to actually share my experience of what it was like to be hospitalized with COVID, because I think by now most of us, and or people that either friends or family, would have had some experience with COVID. Either you may have caught it yourselves or known people who have had it, and hopefully it's not been too serious. I mean, I personally have known many people who've had COVID, including my own family. And, they all just had sort of mild symptoms and were able to get over it fairly quickly. And so I just wanted to kind of share my experience of what it's like to actually be hospitalized with it, and so that if, God forbid, it should ever happen to you or people that then you'll kind of know what to expect, what the procedure would be, what kind of treatment you can expect to get, and hopefully that it will help you somewhat. So this is going to be a long video, so if you want to pause it now, go grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, and then we can have a chat. So it's been just over a month since I was hospitalized, and I'm still coughing quite a bit. But if you heard me, even just a week ago, I could barely talk without sort of like, bleh. Already I sound 100 times better than I was, but it is going to be a long process. And so really, I just wanted to kind of share my whole experience with you guys. So starting from sort of like the first week of December, my husband, Eric, had tested positive for COVID, but he was fine. He just had mild symptoms. He lost his sense of taste, and he just felt sort of quite tired and like he had a cold, but it was really nothing that he couldn't handle. But when I tested myself, I was actually negative. But I did feel like I was coming down with something. So maybe, I assumed that maybe it was just a normal cold because the weather was turning. And because my lateral flow test was negative, it didn't really worry me. And then I started sort of breaking out into sort of cold sweats, and I started feeling a bit feverish. So I thought, okay, well, this is very strange, because normally if I feel unwell, I'll just take over-the-counter medicine, and then after 2 or 3 days, I'll be absolutely fine. But this time, it didn't seem to be letting up. So I actually started feeling very unwell, and I was feverish. And those of you might have seen, my community post where my husband had taken a picture of me sleeping. By then I had already been ill for more than 5 days, and I literally couldn't do anything. I was bedridden. And so I started deteriorating. So I thought, okay, well, this is obviously more serious than I thought. And eventually I called up the GP surgery, and I'd spoken to their in-house paramedic, and he sort of said that, okay, well, it sounds as if it's a chest infection that I might have, because at that point I was actually coughing quite badly, and I was sort of struggling with breathlessness, but it wasn't too bad at that point. So he prescribed antibiotics for me, and also an inhaler. And he said, okay, well, take it for the week, finish the antibiotics, and if things don't improve, then you can come back and get a face-to-face appointment so long as I take a PCR test before and the results are negative, then I will be able to get a face-to-face appointment. So prior to my antibiotics finishing, I ordered a PCR test, did it, got it sent off to the lab, and it took only about 48 hours for the results to come back. And again, it was negative. So at that point, I didn't think I had COVID at all. So I wasn't sort of worried about that. So I just thought, okay, well, this is just maybe I've got bronchitis or, just a very bad chest infection. So on the 13th of December, this was when I just finished my antibiotics and I had received my negative PCR test the day before. I phoned up the GP surgery again. I told the paramedic that, following on from my previous appointment, I've not gotten better. In fact, I seem to be getting worse. I'm now coughing more. I'm now even more breathless. And I feel like my pulse was raising very, very fast. Something was not right. So he allowed me to go to the surgery on that day. So my husband drove me. And when I got in to see him, the first thing he did was he measured my oxygen level, and he could tell, even just walking from the waiting room to the consultation room, I was panting like that. I was so out of breath. So when he measured my oxygen level, the first thing he said to me was, "Florence, I don't want you to be alarmed, but you are very ill." He said, "Your oxygen level has actually dropped down to 83%. And then he tested my blood pressure and my pulse, and he said my heart rate was beating really, really fast because it was obviously trying to compensate. So my pulse was really just going crazy." And he told me I needed to go to A&E, which is accident and emergency, straight away. And so he was going to print out the forms, and he told me that he would summarize my condition, and he would say that I was at risk of heart failure. But he did say that he didn't want me to be alarmed, because the reason he did that was just to elevate my case so that I would be seen sooner. Because once you get into A&E, you could be there for hours, because they have like a triage system, and you get seen by the severity of your case. So, and at the time, I mean, my heart was racing like crazy, because I told him that even just the smallest movement, I would be so breathless. And at that time, my heart was pumping so fast, it felt like it was going to burst. I actually thought that, I was going to have a heart attack. I had never experienced anything like that. It was really scary. So, he actually wrote on the form, risk of heart failure. And so he told me to just get myself to A&E ASAP. So my husband took me home. I just packed a couple of things because I didn't know how many hours I would be there for. So I just needed to, just pack like a flask of hot water and maybe a snack, and just made sure that I was warm enough. So my husband then dropped me to A&E because he wasn't allowed to accompany me. So I went in on my own with the forms, and thankfully, I only waited just over an hour. So in the waiting room, I was with everyone else, and I mean, it's not the nicest of place. And, to be honest, I really, really didn't want to be there. And I certainly didn't expect to end up in A&E, because I was thinking at the time that all I had was maybe, bronchitis or something like that. Then maybe I could just get some steroid inhalers or tablets and I'll be done with it. I did not expect to be told that my oxygen level was at a dangerous low and I was at risk of heart failure. That was completely bizarre to me. But so there I was in the waiting room at A&E, and then I was called in. And the first thing they did again was to test for COVID. So they did another lateral flow test. Again, it came back negative. And then, of course, the senior nurse went through the forms, tested my oxygen level and verified that it was very low. So immediately I was wheeled into the resuscitation unit because they had run out of beds in the A&E. So I was there, I was hooked up to the oxygen tank, and then another nurse came in because she wanted to see, just to check how much oxygen I needed. And then as soon as she saw my stats, she was like, right, you're going to need the full whack. So I thought, oh, okay. So I was, she turned it up to the max. And immediately I started sort of feeling better, like I could actually breathe. And it took quite a while. And then, other nurses came in. They put a cannula on that. They inserted a cannula. They took a lot of bloods because they had to, obviously carry out a lot of blood tests. And you'll have to excuse the coughing because I'm still, struggling with the coughing, although it's already better. But it is what it is. So anyway, so they took a lot of bloods and measured my blood pressure and so on. And so after a lot of waiting around, the results came back. They said that at this stage, although my lateral flow and PCR were negative, they couldn't rule out COVID. My bloods definitely showed infection. So they suspected it could be pneumonia. But again, they had to sort of wait for other tests to come in. They tested for everything else, including flu and even HIV. I mean, they left no stone unturned. And they said that they would even give me a CT scan. So I had to wait for that. And so eventually they wheeled me into the room to get my CT scan. Now, I've had CT scans before, but this one was a little bit different because they said they needed to inject a dye into my body so that they could see my lungs more clearly. And they explained the sensation that I would feel. And it was very, very strange because when I went into the room, it was absolutely freezing cold. But they told me that once they started injecting the dye, I would actually feel the liquid go through my body and then I will feel very hot. And that was exactly how I felt. And then they said that I might even feel like I had wet myself. So I thought, oh, okay, great. And so they started injecting, they put the needle through the cannula and they started injecting the dye. And honestly, at that moment, it was the strangest feeling. I could actually feel the liquid go through my bloodstream right the way through my body, traveling down. And then I felt a really hot sensation, like I was in a sauna or something. And then as it traveled down below, I actually did feel like I had peed myself, even though I didn't, but it felt like I did. So it was so strange. And then, I had to lie still, and then they wheeled me into, under the machine, under the scan, and I had to hold my arm up, one arm up, and then a voice came through the monitor and asked me to hold my breath, take a deep breath and hold for a few seconds, and I had to do that a couple of times, and then it was done. And then after a while, that sensation went away and it was fine. So then they wheeled me back into the resus unit. And again, it was just a lot of waiting around, and every now and again, someone would come in, take my blood pressure, watch my oxygen level. And it was getting better, but it was still low, very low. And then eventually, they did another PCR test, which they were going to send to their lab and try to expedite the results. Because when the results of the scan came back, it was clear as day that my lungs were pretty much ravaged and blocked. And they told me that it actually looked like typical lungs that have been damaged by COVID. So they said, even though the PCR tests were negative, the scans were undeniable. And it was very obvious that my lungs had been damaged by COVID. So at that point, although they'd already started giving me antibiotics intravenously, I think they hadn't yet started on the steroid because they needed confirmation. But I think when the scan came back and they saw how blocked my lungs were, it kind of gave them the justification to then start the steroid treatment. And at that point also, they they told me that there was no way they were going to let me go home, and that I would have to be hospitalized and moved up to the COVID ward. So I thought, oh my gosh, how did it turn out to be this way, And so anyway, they moved me up to the COVID ward, but thankfully they put me in a private room. Oh my goodness, that really, I was so grateful for that, because what they said was that because my COVID tests were negative, they didn't want to expose me on the open ward to other patients who were still positive, because it meant that, I had suffered from COVID, but the virus wasn't live anymore. But even though my lungs were already damaged and I had secondary infection, it wasn't live anymore. So they didn't want to expose me to patients who were still struggling with the live virus. So they were very mindful of that. So they wanted to keep me separate from those other patients. So I was put in a private room, which made such a difference. And then that evening, I, of course, had to call my husband to pack my bag, and he wasn't allowed to actually come into the ward. So I told him what I needed, and then he came to the entrance of the ward and had to ring a bell, and then the nurse went out to fetch it for me. And then at that point, they started giving me the steroids, which was very strong. I think I was given dexamethasone. So I've got a whole list of medication that I was given. So not only was I given antibiotics and steroids intravenously, they also gave it to me orally as well. I also had stomach injections, which was to stop me getting blood clots. So they injected me with like a blood thinner, because obviously I wasn't active, and I was still obviously hooked up to the oxygen tank, because at that point I still couldn't breathe independently. So I was pretty wired up. And every couple of hours, someone would come in, measure my blood, or prick my finger to measure the blood sugar level. So that first night was pretty eventful. Hadn't expected to end up being there, but there I was. I was grateful that at least, I was being well looked after, and and at least now I knew what was wrong with me and what was happening. So anyway, the following morning, the consultant came and explained, in detail, and again clarified and showed me the x-ray, the scan, and showed me that all the white parts were, the blockages. And so the center part was my heart, and then everywhere else, surrounding it were the blockages around my lungs. And she said, even though, the PCR showed a negative result, which sometimes it can do, if the virus has been there, you know, sort of laying dormant for a while and it's not live, but yet it's caused some kind of secondary infection and it's already, you know, caused the damages. And I think, you know, I had to keep explaining the process. So I had to sort of repeat the timeline of things and for them to get a clearer picture. And I think it was quite clear that, you know, I had been feeling unwell for at least a good couple of months, you know, on and off. So I think it's possible that the virus had been lying dormant and I've just been kind of fighting it myself. Although I assumed that maybe I was just feeling run down because I was working ridiculously hard. I was working every God-given hour, had one event after another event after another event, sort of work event, and doing a lot of coaching and always in meetings or, you know, on calls. And then, of course, you know, doing my usual chores, being a wife and a mother as well. I just wasn't resting. So I just thought that maybe I was overworked. And, but when my husband caught COVID, even though his symptoms were mild, it must have then triggered a reaction. And then, you know, it caused some kind of secondary infection, and then it kind of all blew up. So that was kind of their explanation. And but at that point, you know, they were happy to actually start the treatment for COVID. And so the steroids that I was given were very strong. They gave me a very high dosage. And what I found was that while I was on the steroid, I'm actually still on steroids, but I'm on a different type now. So while I was on the dexamethasone, because of the high dosage, I wasn't sleeping. So they explained that it can actually increase the adrenaline level in your body. So I wasn't able to sleep at all for days. Even though, you know, at nighttime I would close my eyes and even during the day I would try to close my eyes. I never fell into like a deep sleep. I'd kind of be sort of in and out of maybe consciousness. And at times I almost felt like I was hallucinating. It was the strangest feeling. And even though I was tired, I never once yawned. So for days, I never even yawned. I don't think I yawned for at least 5 days. And so that was what the doctor told me, that it was actually quite a common side effect for people to experience, you know, that because their adrenaline would suddenly rise, that their brain wouldn't switch off. So my brain was sort of went into overdrive. So at nighttime, it was just like, you know, I would kind of keep thinking about one thing after another. And then it was very strange. So that was the effects I had from taking the steroids. And like I said, you know, while I was in hospital, it was difficult to rest anyway, because every 2 or 3 hours, somebody would come into the room and just kind of prod me and test me for this and that, or give me my medicine or inject me. And then, you know, the machines would be beeping. So it was difficult to rest anyway. And at times it was also a little bit distressing to hear, you know, the patients in the open ward kind of crying for help. There was an elderly lady who was crying all the time and she was calling for help. And I felt terrible because I already felt bad enough and I felt like I was suffering. And even though I'm relatively, you know, young, so I could only imagine how much worse it was for her being elderly. So, you know, it was a little bit distressing as well. And also hearing the nurses running around whenever the alarms went off. And then, of course, I was still hooked up to the oxygen tank, which was attached to my bed. So every time I needed to go to the bathroom, I had to call them to change it to like the mobile tank, so I could wheel the whole thing into the bathroom with me. So that was a bit awkward. But thankfully, by the second day, they told me that they needed to start turning down the oxygen level just so that I wouldn't become totally dependent. So by the evening of the second day, they turned it down slightly. And then on the third day, they had turned it down by half. So they were trying to wean me off just so that they could eventually discharge me, because they could not let me go home unless they were confident I could breathe on my own. So anyway, I was there for 4 days. And during that time, I have to say, I was incredibly well looked after. All the staff were just amazing. No matter how stressed or tired they were, they always came in with a smile on their face and, you know, always really reassuring and explained everything very clearly to me. And they even sent a physiotherapist to make sure that I would be okay once I got home, because at that point, I really had no strength on my legs because I had been lying down for so long. And prior to me being hospitalized, I was at home and I was in bed. So I hadn't been active at all. And I noticed a lot of muscle reduction in my legs. So I didn't have much strength. So he needed to make sure that I would be okay, you know, going up and down the stairs. I said I had help, and the stairs at my home was only just one flight anyway, so it wasn't too bad, and I should be able to manage. But you know, they just made sure that they had all the bases covered. And so it was really great. I mean, and thankfully I had a very good appetite as well, and I was pleasantly surprised by the food that was available. You know, that I had a menu to choose from every day. So breakfast was always either toast or cereal, and then, you know, I had teas, coffees, and of course I had my flask with me, so I always made sure that they refilled my flask with hot water. And so yeah, I mean, the meals, like, oh my gosh, they had this green Thai curry. It was so delicious. So I was really surprised they had really good food. And they had like really nice casseroles and stews, and so that was very nice. And yeah, so finally on the fourth day, the doctor took off the oxygen completely, and she made me walk around, just walk outside the room and along the corridor. So she tested my oxygen level prior to walking was round about 98. No, sorry, it was about 102 or 103. And then after the walk, it dropped to about 97, 98. So she said it was okay. She was happy with that, and she was willing to let me go. And she just said, you know, just to make sure that if I ever felt, once I was at home, if I felt really breathless or if I started feeling my heart racing again, that I should just call A&E, call for an ambulance straight away. But she prescribed like a whole bag full of like a cocktail of drugs. So I was still given dexamethasone steroids to take, but I was also given a second type of steroid, which was the prednisolone, and I'm still on that at the moment. I've still got about three weeks worth of prednisolone. And then at the time I was given clarithromycin antibiotics whilst I was at the hospital, but then I was given a different type of antibiotics, amoxiclav, and then I was also given apixaban tablets. So I was given like a month's worth of that, which was the blood thinner, just to make sure that I would not develop blood clots. So I was definitely, yeah, well taken care of. So yeah, I mean, I'm just so blessed to have pulled through without too much complications. And And that's me having already been vaccinated with both jabs. So I can only imagine, had I not been vaccinated, I have no doubt whatsoever that I would have ended up being in intensive care. So I'm so grateful that, things did not escalate to a point where, it actually caused damages to my heart or anything like that. That even though my lungs were damaged, I am in the process of recuperating. It is slowly and gradually clearing up. And I was, given the treatment at the right time, and, the doctors made the right call. And really, I'm just so thankful to the NHS and all the staff for giving me exceptional care. But also, it kind of leads me to think that for those of you who are still on the fence about being vaccinated, I really do urge you to reconsider, because you might be thinking, well, you caught COVID and you were vaccinated, so what's the point? Well, the thing is, getting vaccinated does not mean that you're not going to catch COVID. It means that if you do catch it, it gives you a far more stronger chance to fight it, especially if you're someone with underlying health conditions. Then it's really important to think what the consequences could be if you catch COVID and you're not vaccinated. So I do urge you to please reconsider. I don't want to be preachy about it, but it is very real. And when you've been through the process like I've been, you would never ever wish it, not even on your worst enemy, because I've never experienced something so traumatic. And it is scary, because for 4 days I was in the ward, and even though, I was well looked after, I was on my own. I wasn't allowed visitors, and I was able to, although I was able to, FaceTime or WhatsApp with my family, I couldn't talk. I could barely talk, and I had this, oxygen mask on all the time, and it was nothing I had ever experienced before. That feeling of not being able to breathe, of just every movement completely, draining me. I had bruises everywhere from all the bloods they took, and I had little holes, like from all the pinpricks they gave me, and I just felt, my whole body felt so battered and bruised. And I really felt so tremendously ill, like nothing I had ever experienced. So this is not something I would ever wish on anyone. So, COVID is going to stay with us for quite some time, although hopefully we're kind of at the tail end of it. But still, there is no letting off. We all have to be extremely vigilant. We have to be safe. And we really do have to be extra careful. And like I said, I am very grateful to have managed to pull through without too much complications, and time will tell whether there will be any permanent damages. I still have a follow-up appointment with the respiratory clinic, which is due in a couple of weeks. And then, of course, I'm still waiting to get my booster shots as well, both my husband and myself, because when you've had COVID, you do have to wait a certain period of time before you can have further injections. But hopefully once we've had our booster shots, then, we'll be completely fully protected. And I believe, we would have already developed antibodies anyway from our previous 2 vaccinations, and also catching COVID, our antibodies would have risen. So so hopefully we will be fully protected. But yeah, it was really quite dreadful. And I'm just glad that I did make it home in time for Christmas. I was able to relax and at home and just have my boys kind of wait on me. They were amazing, especially Isaac. Oh, goodness, he did so much cleaning. He was scrubbing the toilets, changing my bed sheets, dusting, hoovering. He did everything, bless him. And he was always bringing me, you know, water or teas, and little Noah was always, you know, making sure I was okay. And Eric, my hubby, he did so much cooking and, you know, making loads of soups, making sure I was well fed. And so, so yeah, it was just lovely to be home. And of course, I have to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you who sent me really, really lovely messages on Instagram and on my community post, just sending all these well wishes. And a lot of you reached out to me privately. I really felt so overwhelmed by all the love and all the support. So thank you to each and every one of you. And I have to say, you know, out of every negative situation, there's always something positive you can gain out of it. And for me, it allowed me the time to reflect on what has been going on. And I know that moving forwards, there are a lot of changes I have to make because I've been so overworked. And I know now I really need to take a step back. And I'm only now just gradually easing back into work very slowly, just doing sort of more admin stuff. And but I think now, even sort of moving forwards, I'm going to learn to delegate a lot more. Also learn to say no a lot more as well, but also making necessary changes to my diet, my lifestyle, to exercise. I mean, it's crazy that I live near a lake, but I don't really go out walking as much as I should, but I definitely will from now on, and make use of the beautiful surroundings that I'm in. And yeah, I think, you know, making positive changes in my life, because really health is everything. It doesn't matter what you have, how many luxury handbags you have, or fine jewelry or whatnot. None of those things matter at all if you don't have your health to enjoy them, and if you don't have your family, if you cannot spend precious quality time with your family, nothing else matters. So, you know, it's really now getting my focus and priority right in my life as well. And so, yeah, I'm just going to sort of relax a lot more and hopefully, you know, get myself back on track. And yeah, with regards to YouTube, I will continue, you know, making videos, but probably not as often as before. You know, I only just want to film when I do have something to share that I think is interesting, because I don't want to just make videos for the sake of uploading something and then I end up just simply rehashing the same things, you know, old videos. So but I probably also want to do some other things, that, you know, maybe do some cooking videos as well, which I did do in the past and they were pretty well received, and I really enjoy cooking, so I would love to share more of that with you guys. And there'll be some unboxing videos coming up as well, so do watch out for them. And anyway, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm just going to try and enjoy it and not make it feel like it's an obligation or a chore. It's really important that I enjoy what I do as well, and stay connected with you guys. So once again, I just want to thank you for all the love and support. And as we start this new year, I just want to wish you all love, joy, and peace, and above all, the best of health for 2022. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you will, you know, find this video useful. I definitely am aware that it could differ country to country, but I would imagine, you know, with the COVID treatments, probably they're fairly similar in, you know, even in different countries. I would imagine the treatments are fairly similar, if not the same. So hopefully, you know, it just gives you an idea of the procedure. But I really hope for your sakes you'll never have to experience it. So please stay safe and stay blessed. Take care.